What is a dirty secret of your industry that implies the general public has no clue about, but everyone in your field knows? Grocery store, the amount of food waste is unfathomable. We have the usual out of date, open, and possibly contaminated by a customer, or left out of refrigeration or out of temp by a customer somewhere in the store. The big one, though, is presentation. Damaged boxes with perfectly sealed inner plastic are discarded rather than marked down. I once disposed of 140 plus pounds of ground turkey because it was darker than the company's standard. It was perfectly fine to eat with no change in flavor, just browning before its sell-by date. It was not donated, it was put in the trash. I had made meatless spaghetti the night before due to finances. I am still salty about it years later. Also, employees constantly leave items out of refrigeration, and corporate's first question when we show large losses, like an entire pallet left in the back room out of temp for 20 plus hours, is always, "Were you able to save any of it?" And we're one of the better ones. Be wary of any meat or otherwise highly perishable items you buy from someone whose livelihood depends on turning a profit in a notoriously low-margin industry. Yikes, the amount of food thrown away every single night at grocery stores like big box ones like Target should be criminal, am I right? Story 2. K through 12 education. Most of the major issues going on in education right now are caused outside the school. Schmucky parents, poverty, media, technology, etc. All of these things are screwing up kids left and right. People complain about how much schools are spending, but the reality is that schools are being made the scapegoat for a lot of these problems because fixing them would mean holding others accountable. So instead, some meager funding is thrown towards schools with the charge of basically reversing all of society's schmucky tendencies. Special education is being way over-identified in some cases, autism, ADHD mostly, because, again, of the same issues listed above. Do you want to help your kids? Make sure to instill reading at a very early age, moderate screen time, have them play outside or do other things instead of using tech as a babysitter. Make sure there's structure and nutrition and teach them basics for hygiene, exercise, etc. If you can provide those basic skills and an attitude of learning and trying, that's 99% of the battle right there. Kids that come to school ready and from stable homes, the majority of those kids have no problem at all in school. It's the students from messed up homes, poor basics, and inconsistent lives that usually are the most behind because school isn't a priority when survival is the main thing on their minds. Want to improve education? Find ways to reduce poverty. Story 3. The longevity of manufactured electronics like appliances and tools is not really even in the top 10 things considered for the consumer. It's all about cost reductions and the price for which you can sell it. If you're lucky, it will be better than the prior model in maybe one singular way, but they probably remove some of the brushes in the motor that you can't see to pay for the improvement. This is how we end up with schmucky Korean refrigerators that last 1 week longer than the extended warranty you buy. The tech to make them last 30 years has been around forever, but the will to keep it that way has evaporated. Stay away from LG and Samsung. Story 4. Some family court cases don't go through on the scheduled court dates because of an artificial court reporter shortage due to stenographer lobbying. Stenographic court reporters have pushed for voice and digital court reporters to not be accepted in certain states. They are retiring and not training new court reporters so they can charge whatever they want and only take the big-paying cases. So, in states like California, where digital reporting isn't legal and voice reporting has only been accepted for about 2 years, there is a massive backlog and many cases just don't go forward. It's a classic case of boomers pulling the ladder up behind them. Emergency hearing because your ex is stalking you and you want a restraining order? Sorry, Bertha wants a $5 per page and won't show up for less than a 3-hour hearing. And there's nobody else available, but she can do next week, maybe. I'm a legal videographer and lawyers are livid and starting to push back, but the damage is done. Story 5. Online marketing here. While cookies don't do what most people think they do, for example, follow you home and find out what you do all day long, we can still track you. Most, if not all, online privacy is BS. You delete cookies? Good for you. We can still get your browser or some other form of fingerprint, or we'll match you in some kind of lookalike audience. The Metas and the Googles of this world don't give a crap and will offer you up to the highest ad space bidder. Oh, and that old school Facebook like button, it's a little iframe that reports back to Meta, allowing them to track you all over the internet. That's how we know you're into tractors or whatever. The sites you visit have ad tracking scripts too. And for people that still haven't caught on yet, Google knows everything you do online anyway because they supply you with a free browser. If the product is free, you are the product. Story 6. I worked for a jet engine manufacturer. I was in a position where I got all the incident reports that affected our engines. Bird strikes were a daily occurrence somewhere in the world. They would run DNA tests to find out the species. As there was usually not much left, there wasn't usually any damage unless it was something like a goose or ibis. One airline sticks in my mind. Somebody set off the fire suppression foam in the hangar. One of the planes was getting a new sound system installed, so all the access doors were open. The report said every nook and cranny was full of foam. Both engines had to come off the wing for a teardown and overhaul. The foam is corrosive. The funny part, it happened again a month later. Same airline, same hangar. Story 7. Computers don't need to be anywhere near as powerful as they are today, except we're building crappy software on top of crappy software. We could game on 2010 hardware with great graphics if we spent time optimizing the software, but instead we just keep pumping money into better hardware so we could achieve the AI crap we got today. Now we're going to hit a wall with processing and storage, then backtrack on software efficiency. When it comes down to it, that old brick of a laptop from 2010 you threw away because it couldn't do crap would actually be super passable loaded with the right light software. Too bad you bought 3 new computers since then to keep up with inflationary spec requirements. Story 8. I'm an electrician. If your house has wiring more than 35 to 50 years old, you might want to consider a whole home rewire or at least hire an electrician to inspect and replace devices, fixtures, and panels, depending on the quality and where the original work. People expect to pay for new shingles every X years, and while wiring doesn't really go bad in the walls, don't expect everything to last forever or be designed for modern compatibility with ever-growing technology. Better installation practices, improved quality of life, and added regulations and safety standards. You know how everyone, especially schmucks, complains about the quality of modern junk being crappy by design? Yeah, I'm not refuting planned obsolescence, but a big part of why newer appliances and devices fail to meet or exceed advertised lifespans is improper grounding and a lack of surge suppression. Older homes were designed for analog appliances and incandescent bulbs, not the digital age and LEDs. Oh, and if you live in a mobile home, please be aware those don't ever have to meet building codes in most places in the USA and are only required to meet national DMV/DOT standards for electrical safety, which incidentally were never intended for permanent residences. Ask your local fire department, those death traps go up right at about 25 to 35 years after manufacture like clockwork from electrical fires all the time. They rarely take more than 15 minutes from the initial spark to being a burnt rectangle of dirt where your everything used to be. I speak from personal experience on that one. Story 9. Trawling is literally underwater strip mining and no one will do anything about it. I am a former employee of a subsidiary owned by a major USA seafood company. We are decimating the oceans for pollock and marketing it as sustainable. Bycatch is real and fisheries are in massive decline due to it. We throw over millions of pounds of fish and other sea life bycatch for a fish, pollock, that has no commercial value until it was discovered it could be used as a cod substitute, as well as other substitutes. We literally destroy crab fisheries to harvest pollock to sell it back as fake crab, surimi. Salmon, halibut, and rockfish are on the decline and the communities that rely on them are powerless because their very own community corporations and development corporations own CDQs, community development quotas, that get money from trawling. It's basically biting the hand that feeds you. Voters refuse to vote against any party lines and keep voting in Republicans whose top contributor is the seafood industry, yet voters complain something needs to be done about trawling. And the boards and agencies that are supposed to manage all this are appointed by the same machine that keeps trawling going. You can't even make this stuff up. Story 10. I work at a small museum, but this is true for anyone in collections. We don't want your grandparents' stuff. The vast majority of the time, it consists of things we already have too much of and not enough space for. Most of us will try to listen and let people down gently, though. Obviously, these things have emotional value to them, even if the item doesn't have any value as an artifact. For the really pushy people, we accept the donation officially and then find a way to get rid of it. There are exceptions, of course, but they make up less than 10% of all donation offers we receive. And for all that is holy, please stop trying to donate pianos or military uniforms unless you know a place that actually could use them. No, we really don't want them. Story 11. IT. Some companies run it like the Wild West, whether it's crappy equipment maintenance or replacement or dodgy licensing. This is not an exhaustive list. One example, a regional telecoms company in the UK had its server, the one that handled all the business-grade accounts, standing on a shelf directly under an air conditioning unit. The aircon unit decided that it would vent the condensate buildup onto the server rather than down the appropriate outflow tube. The business customers were without email and telecoms for several days. The notional quote-unquote scapegoat was fired. A new server was installed in the same place. This was decided by a person who was not the original scapegoat and was the real problem in the system. The aircon sprung a second leak a few weeks later. They had not done anything to solve the problem. No further information was available as to who got shown the door after the second incident. Story 12. All eggs come from the same place. Those brown ones, not healthier, just brown. Those big ones, just a big egg. There are only about 15 plants that are GMO, so it's a joke when they tell you a product doesn't have GMOs if those plants aren't even involved. Look up the plants listed for GMO. That's it. All those quote-unquote certified organic labels? Lies. Only the USDA can give it that official stamp, otherwise you just pay some money and a private company gives you their own stamp. Most of the time, organic doesn't even mean better. It just means they use manure as fertilizer. Could be animals, could be humans, who knows? The ag industry has a lot of secrets that people don't know, are too obtuse to understand, or are literal misinformation. Vegans and more animals than they would like you to know. Story 13. Vehicle ownership in Europe and North America will likely disappear over the next 30 years. For private individuals, it will become too expensive to own a vehicle just from the purchase price alone. What is already happening now is that car lifespans are being regulated by the requirement to provide firmware updates after a vehicle has stopped being manufactured. The internal standard discussed now is 5 years. In the worst case scenario, your VW, BMW, or Toyota releases a 2027 car model and then discontinues it for 2028. So, after 2032, your vehicle will not only stop receiving firmware updates, it will likely be bricked and no longer be able to connect to critical vehicle management infrastructure, leaving you unable to use your 1 + 5 year vehicle. And they are already planning to negotiate with regulators to extend this to 10 years if regulators want to change the law. That is a little better, but classic car ownership is gone. 2019 is theoretically the last car year that could become a classic car one day. Anything newer will eventually become bricked. This is specifically for Korean, European, and US auto and industrial equipment manufacturers. You can thank John Deere, BMW, VW, Mercedes, Kia, Hyundai, and Ford specifically. This list is not comprehensive, but these are some of the major players working to make vehicles a crappy subscription service. Story 14. University outreach. I work in a university doing school outreach. Basically, we'd come to schools and tell kids to enroll with us when it was time for higher education. We lied so much and we were coached on doing so. I actually regret some of what I said as a uni student doing this work. For example, I did an Asian language degree. My managers forever told me to hype up that degree, but I wasn't allowed to tell the kids that the Asian studies department was horribly understaffed and you could barely finish your degrees on time. Stuff like that. Anyway, those tables at career fairs or whatever are never going to be honest with you or your kids. Ask someone who attends the university or someone who teaches there. Story 15. Corporate legal. The field operates on information asymmetry. Big firms train junior lawyers, squeeze every billable hour out of them, and then send them to their big clients when they leave. Those clients hire them because of the firm's reputation. The firms then control those clients using plants, loyalists to the firm who are promoted within the client's company on the back of recommendations by senior partners. You can often tell who they are because they love to send around articles written by their law firm of choice. Those who play ball and convince the client they need to outsource legal work to the law firms, which for the most part they absolutely do not, get rewarded with career opportunities and lavish lunches. Most companies could hire in-house counsel and paralegals for a much smaller fee and do away with 50 to 80% of their external legal fees easily. Meanwhile, the firms charge exorbitant fees for what is mostly just reading and typing. Those who don't play ball have their careers stifled and are privately defamed through informal background checks. If CFOs and CEOs knew this, big law firms would cease to exist, but thanks to plants who convince them that firms offer a reputation or insurance protection that cannot be replicated internally, it absolutely can via self-insurance and actuarial analysis, the cycle continues. Currently, I am running a project at a very large institution to cut most of the external spend in favor of hiring in-house lawyers, and I'm meeting fierce opposition. Law firms have turned it into an absolute firestorm. I have already proven the new model works across several teams. It is just the politics that need to be navigated. To successfully implement change, you must go directly to the CEO and CFO. The general counsel, GC, is almost always a plant, so there is no point talking to them. But doing that means you need to be prepared to go to war with the GC and the law firms. Not everyone has the stomach for that. Story 16. OR nurse. It's true that surgeries in the beginning of the day are just set up for success more than surgeries later on. People are on time, we have the equipment, we're caffeinated, etc. Also, unless you need surgery in the next 12 hours for an emergency, it really doesn't hurt to get a second opinion. Read reviews on surgeons and ask friends who have had similar procedures. Not all surgeons are created equal, they're just humans who can and do make mistakes. The thing is, you don't want a surgeon who makes them often. Also, for the love of God, Please perform basic, some may consider it detailed, hygiene before you come in. You wouldn't believe the stuff we see in relation to this. Story 17. Donated money does not always go where people think. Organizations often ask for money concerning a specific catastrophe, but that money actually goes into the next year's budget, which is shared among all expenses. Sometimes when it comes to international orgs, the money goes straight out of the country. Only occasionally are special emergency funds established to deal with a sudden ongoing crisis. Many orgs boast about how low their expenses for necessary items are. While they may be honest about that, these organizations often have a huge number of people whose job is literally just to boss others around and drink coffee. The number of people who actually do any meaningful work is lower than people think. The best options for charity donations are small local orgs that run on a shoestring budget. They usually spend all their money on direct action, and you can also follow their work locally. That way, you know for sure if you should donate again. Story 18. 24 years active, retired last year, the dirty secret everyone in the military knows but the civilian world never hears. Most of us don't seek mental health help until we're within about a year of retirement, or at least have terminal leave booked. Until that point, the risk of being labeled non-deployable or limited duty is so high that people just white-knuckle it for decades. That's why on almost every big base, the behavioral health waiting rooms are packed with senior NCOs and officers in their last year who finally feel safe enough to walk through the door. You'll see a handful of younger troops and junior enlisted too, usually after a serious mental health crisis, a substance-related incident, a domestic situation, or something that results in mandatory intervention. But the overwhelming majority are the old heads who spent 15 to 25 years pretending they were fine. Once you do go in, the default answer is almost always medication that day. SSRIs, anxiety meds, something for sleep, because therapy waitlists are measured in months and the system just needs you to be stable enough to finish your contract or retirement paperwork. Civilians assume mental health support is available and used throughout a career. The reality is most of us wait until the absolute last safe moment, then get medicated just well enough to make it out the gate. Every career troop knows this cycle. Nobody outside the service does. Story 19. I've been beating casinos with a team for years. Without fail, the way we get caught and shut down is that our accounts are the only ones that are up money. I think my host at the Win drove it home the hardest when I asked for a comp. I'm looking at your account and I see something I haven't seen in my 10 years working here. You're a lifetime winner at the Win. Are you sure you want me to ask for this comp? Do not gamble. No matter what you think, you cannot beat these casinos unless you also have a complicated operation with 100 people, slot machine mathematicians, and years of data. Even then, the casino will eventually notice you won a little bit of money and ban you. Story 20. I work in mental health. There is a local branch of a nationwide organization that gets a lot of the government grants and funding for services in our region, but doesn't actually provide those services. There are many great mental health resources in our area that are losing funding to this organization. At the higher levels, we know that they misrepresent data and falsely present numbers to suggest that their services are needed. On paper, they receive hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions, in funding to provide mental health services in our region. But in reality, the services don't exist or are incredibly small. The local community knows the service is crappy, wait times are constantly changing, and people are passed around from person to person. Story 21. Your relatives aren't getting the best treatment at any skilled or assisted nursing facilities. The staff is so understaffed, overworked, underpaid, and mistreated that they simply do not care. Your relatives will get just enough treatment not to pass away or trigger a lawsuit, and even that is questionable because unless you put a camera inside the rooms, which is often illegal, you can't prove anything. Also, some people will actually lick a substance patch even after it has been thrown in the garbage. Furthermore, many anesthesiologists get fixated to their own supply. A lot of doctors shouldn't be working. Your doctor might have multiple malpractice cases but receive temporary privileges to work because of nepotism. That applies to therapists too. There are many who are unlicensed or have had their licenses taken away, yet are still working. Story 22. I clerked for a judge as a freshly minted lawyer. Judges are ambitious, intense people who usually come from or have existed within a bubble of privilege for long enough that they can be quite delusional. Furthermore, they apply the law to reach the outcomes they want, whether they admit it or not. It's impossible not to, at least sometimes at some level. The courts in a capitalist society are mostly about creating conditions for a population's passivity in the smoother operation of commercial power, including the criminal justice system. Story 23. I work as a medical assistant in fast optometry. These are vision care places and malls in similar locations like America's Best and Stanton Optical. Please avoid these places like the plague. These companies exist primarily to sell glasses, not to monitor your health. They mostly rely on telehealth doctors who just push through orders and don't bother to look at any of the medical testing. I'm always advising patients under the table to go elsewhere. Either find a very reputable optometrist who performs full-scope optometry, which is when they take medical testing seriously, or see an ophthalmologist for more serious eye concerns. I plan on getting a job elsewhere soon. And if you're enjoying the video or learning a thing or two as well, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 24. Education collectively as a function of society collapsed entirely in the United States from 2016 to 2024. A huge percentage of high school graduates are functionally illiterate and can't do basic job tasks, let alone get into college or even a trade school. Over the last 3 to 4 years post-COVID, there was no recovery. All the passionate teachers who love teaching got burned out from the workload, while every generation says the next one is lazy or not as smart as the previous one because of the Bush administration's No Child Left Behind policy and the current government's disdain for education. It's actually true this time. For 2 decades, the United States made it so children weren't allowed to fail. They just got passed up the ladder until their high school gave them a diploma. By around 2016, this process was institutionalized. Children who don't do their work aren't held back or given consequences, and for many parents, that's enough. They don't care. Between Betsy DeVos' COVID, the Department of Education being disbanded, and anti-intellectualism being parroted by the White House, we did it to ourselves. I'm a substitute teacher and I go all over the school district, grades 7 through 12. We, as a society, basically failed the next generation. It's not their fault they goofed off when they were 11 and never had that moment of realization. Wait, that assignment was important. I have summer school now. Or I didn't do enough work to go from 4th grade to 5th grade. Those moments teach self-discipline. Instead, they realized early on that work and learning are quote-unquote optional and don't really matter. 3 or 4 years of this makes it so there is nothing an educator can even do by the time they hit high school. You either know how to read and do basic math or you don't. Education in the US, as well as most of the positive statistics, is held up entirely by the immigrant community who take education seriously because, in their home countries, you can be kicked out for being a poor-performing student and a very slim amount of gifted kids who use their devices to learn about the outside world. But for 20 to 60% of the graduating class of 2024, we messed up. We couldn't make them care. They're about to realize how crappy their situation is. Story 25. Data centers and infrastructure. Most modern data centers actually use less water than a golf course and often offset their electricity usage. Most new data centers actually improve the infrastructure in whichever country or municipality they move into, since they invest heavily to ensure healthy operations. Nuclear energy. We've had powerful and reliable nuclear power technology for decades. Our biggest limiting factor is the purity of fuel refining. We can utilize the same power generation found in declassified submarines to create nuclear power plants half the size of a Walmart, and these would be enough to power most cities, 5 gigawatts to 10 gigawatts. Corporate impact. Nestle is absolutely screwing California in terms of water ownership and utilization. Regulation and policy. The USA is super strict on environmental policies when it involves other countries, especially up-and-coming economies that produce the main share of man-made pollution. While global warming is real, what humans produce is only a fraction of what actually causes it. However, the impact is exponential, so we must regulate. Petroleum dependency. We can never truly get away from petroleum. Everything in modern society uses it in some form. Plastics, rubbers, fuel, etc. It is not as scarce as the media and politics make it seem. It is simply under the control of about 50 plus different countries and companies. Story 26. There is most likely no or barely any nanoplastic in you despite some highly cited scientific articles. These findings are often just measuring artifacts due to rushed, sloppy measurement method development by burnt-out junior scientists pressured by their professors to write way too many research papers per year. Highly paid professors chase even more grant money by exploiting young, underpaid, aspiring scientists. The typical scheme is to only extend the visa or job contract of PhD students or postdocs when they manage to publish an unreal amount of papers. The decay of validation. 30 years ago, analytical method development and a validation for new compounds was a 4-year PhD thesis, with 2 to 3 advisors helping with reviewing, discussing, and revalidating the results over and over. Without proving that your method works using deuterated standards and/or certified reference materials or providing other direct evidence that the method is working, it was impossible to publish in a decent journal. Nowadays, some people claim to do method development and validation in a few weeks or months without any validation using standard addition in complex samples. That is simply not possible or reliable. And no AI currently existing is going to help because method development must be done physically in a real laboratory. How to spot reliable data. Therefore, if you read news about microplastic or nanoplastic measurements in the environment or human body, do the following before you believe it. Look up the original study and read it or feed it to an AI and check the methods section for analytical recovery. This should be measured in a standard addition experiment It should be close to 100% but not above, and ideally performed in the analytical background matrix, background concentrations. Check what was measured in an analytical blank and the background matrix. Story 27. I worked in the old-style music business, actually still called the record business when I started. Every single contract, from the most risky small alt band to huge mega-grossing stars, is designed to screw them in every way you can imagine, along with many creative ways I certainly never imagined before encountering them. The white shoe music business law firms all knew this. They took huge fees to chip away at the grift, but for the most part treated it all as boilerplate due to their own complex relationships with the companies. All of the executives were currently or previously their clients, and the conflict of interest was never questioned. In my case, they encountered the previously unknown entity of a well-educated person working in the creative divisions rather than legal. I am perfectly able to read and comprehend the language of these documents. When I would question the inherent inequities hardwired into these agreements, I was met with pure uncomprehending shock that I did not seem to be entirely on board with the idea that the interests of the company supersede all other considerations at all times. I was able to help some artists get better positioned or obtain marginally better terms, but I never had any real impact on the system that was in place at the time. That would have been impossible. In short, crazy as she is, Courtney Love was right about just about everything. Story 28. I've only worked in an applesauce factory, but I can guess the same standards and practices go into effect at other factories as well. This includes things like using expired or bad product to mix in with good product so it doesn't go to waste. Every metric has a threshold and they get as close to the line as possible. The only non-disgusting aspect I've learned from a factory is that kosher is really serious. They send rabbis to the plant to inspect everything. If it's not up to their standards, they will rip the contract from you and you will never get it back. So kosher stuff is usually some of the better quality products you can buy. Also, organic is just a buzzword to trick people into spending more. There's no such thing as organic applesauce. Organic acids do not exist. Organic apples are also not something farmers actually do. I live in the apple country of the USA and have heard farmers laugh about it throughout the years. Everything is apple-based around here. Story 29. I used to work in publishing, and this will likely surprise no one, but it doesn't take that many copies sold to be classified as a quote-unquote bestseller. In Canada, for example, the threshold is often as low as 5,000 copies, though it can be 3,000 in some categories. Sales must be tracked through BookNet, which most bookstores are registered with. Selling them out of the trunk of your car doesn't count. If the author is someone like a politician with money behind them, their team often buys enough copies in bulk to force the book onto the bestseller list. And this status is then used as a crappy marketing tactic to drive legitimate interest. Most authors don't make a lot of money. Writing as a full-time career is incredibly rare and takes a long time to achieve. There are plenty of best-selling authors who haven't quit their day jobs just because they simply can't afford to. Self-publishing used to have a stigma, the idea that your work wasn't good enough for traditional publishing. However, I have way more respect for a self-published author who achieves success now. They put in all the work themselves, from editing to marketing, and it is not easy. Story 30. I'm an art teacher who teaches at a private academy. Most of my students are Asian, and let me tell you, they are incredibly stressed out. After all the years I've been teaching, I found out how many extracurricular activities their parents make them take before they even get to my classroom. They go to soccer, piano, violin, robotics, and academic competitions. Most of their day is booked, and they rarely have a life outside of their own home, let alone the classroom. I'm in my 30s and was never put under that pressure by my own parents, but seeing my students half asleep and barely focusing on my lessons used to upset me until one of them confided in me. Another student was depressed because her cell phone was taken away after she fell out of favor with another teacher who used to speak highly of her. She started hiding it. If that wasn't bad enough, there is also a competition among the parents over which kid does better than the others. Sometimes I catch them snickering about how ugly a painting came out from another child and how their own kid's was slightly better. I've also been bribed by parents to give their child more one-on-one time, which of course I'm not allowed to accept. They get angry when I refuse, thinking one of the other parents got to me first. The high-class attitude of it all is disgusting, but the way they treat their children like display pieces to show off just makes me angry. When their artworks are displayed at our local art shows, I'm proud of them and everyone has a good time. It just sucks that behind all of that are incredibly stressed-out children who don't have a social life. Story 31. I work in new product development in confectionery. In most cases, there is no difference between branded products, for example, Lindt, Cadbury, etc., and private label products, for example, Waitrose or Trader Joe's own brands. They are often produced in the same factories with the same chocolate, but the branded products simply have their price tags doubled or tripled. If you're trying to buy ethical chocolate, you will not find it in any major supermarket chain on the planet. There are pretenders like Tony's, but actually ethically slavery-free chocolate is usually only available in boutique stores or high-end department stores like Selfridges or Harrods. Certifications like Fairtrade, Rainforest Alliance, and Tony's Open Chain rely on mass balance and are usually in bed with at least two of the big three chocolate processors. As far as products go, chocolate is extremely unethical. In all likelihood, any chocolate bar you are eating is tainted by slave and/or child labor, as well as habitat destruction and numerous exploitative practices. Story 32. I've worked in the electric utility industry for over 22 years. Utilities replace a majority of infrastructure through program maintenance every year because it is considered a capital investment. This is ultimately the key driver behind rising utility rates. There will always be ways for utilities to recapitalize assets to ensure they are making money. For example, if the utility replaced the pole in front of your property 2 years ago and it would realistically be fine for over 60 years, they might then roll out a program to replace the overhead wire. If the new wire comes with updated engineering standards for wood pole loading and that 2-year-old pole fails those new calculations, the utility will install a new pole anyway. They can easily justify this to regulators as a necessary safety measure. I have worked in countless areas where 50-year-old infrastructure was functioning perfectly fine but was replaced anyway simply because it fell under the program maintenance budget for that year. Story 33. Reality shows are staged, they must entertain, which means what happens can't be random. It is usually improvised by the characters within limits decided by the producers. The characters are acting, and they know that, even if most of the time they are having their first big experience. They also sign contracts to stay in character before and after the show, especially on social media. The success of a show is linked to how realistic and talented the actors are and making the viewer believe it is all real. Having worked in many film and TV productions, I have signed NDAs for every single one, and I have worked directly with reality actors and producers. One of the most important aspects for any production is how to avoid legal risks. Still, many people in the industry swear that some reality shows must feature real people behaving naturally. Bonus secret, documentaries are also usually built and edited in a way that makes the narrative easy to follow and captivating. I guess people have accepted that many nature documentaries are a mix of videos of different individuals from different times edited together, sometimes telling stories that we can only assume could have happened. All this was all happening before AI. Story 34. AI will crush a generation of college graduates who plan to work white-collar jobs. It won't be immediate, but in the near future, the promise of AI will be too appealing for many CEOs not to jump aboard. Hiring will be impacted as AI continues to learn and improve. So-called knowledge workers will see this impact first. Anyone who relies solely on knowing something to do their job can be easily replaced. If, however, a job relies on doing something, you are safe for a while. Typical blue-collar jobs are much safer. Being a plumber, an electrician, or working another type of hands-on job is the safest path and not easily replaced at this time. Ask yourself, what do I do today that could be done by a machine? My takeaway is that everyone needs a backup plan in case you get whacked by the coming AI generation. Story 35. You may have heard there is a driver shortage. Nope, there is no shortage of drivers. There is a perpetual shortage of people willing to be exploited, and they get their behinds reamed pretty hard. There are a handful of companies that rely on a steady stream of drivers to exploit. They are so exploitative that their driver turnover rate is over 100%. This means their average driver quits in less than 12 months. They may have one driver who sticks with them for 5 years, but for every one of those, 10 other drivers leave in 6 months because the company exploits them so much. These are the companies that perpetually whine about a driver shortage. Then they beg Congress for tax breaks and subsidies to give new recruits minimal training so they can exploit them. Again, they make their money by treating their drivers like absolute dog crap. Because of this, they rely on a constant supply of people to exploit. There are plenty of truckers, but none of them want to work for these schmucks. Story 36. Probably one of the most egregious things I've ever seen, and this is still in practice now, is a process for getting a phone ping in a life or death emergency. Police have to demonstrate that they have exigent circumstances in order to justify using someone's phone to find their location. Think active kidnapping, lost hiker, medical emergency, etc. They fill out a document that they have to provide to the phone carrier to demonstrate that they have cause. However, a lot of carriers require this document to arrive via fax machine. During one emergency, a major cell carrier was arguing with police dispatch claiming they had not received the fax document. Dispatch had tried faxing it no less than 6 times. Police officers were driving around within the radius unable to find the emergency and were getting increasingly worried. The dispatcher asked if they could email the document instead, and the cell carrier said no, there was no email set up to receive the document, it had to be faxed. The dispatcher asked if they could speak to a supervisor, but the call taker told them no, they were the only person assigned to that division. There was no one to escalate to. Officers were getting frustrated and the family was beside themselves with panic on the other line. There was literally nothing anyone could do because a crappy fax machine wasn't working. The dispatcher resorted to screaming that someone was going to pass away if they didn't help. The call taker did not care at all. Genuinely, it was like that scene in Transformers, panic and chaos on one end, with a bored and ambivalent call taker on the other. It ended up taking 10 minutes before the documents, all 6 of them, finally arrived on the fax machine and they thankfully rescued the man in time. But I can only imagine what a disaster it would have been if those 10 minutes had resulted in someone passing away. It's pretty frightening that the difference between rescue or passing away hinges on how well a fax machine may be running on any given day. Story 37. I have a PhD and have been working in a research institute for almost 10 years. Science as a line of work is often romanticized, advancing humanity, inventing new stuff, and so on. The grim reality is that the overwhelming majority of scientists are underpaid, depressed, and disenchanted. Science is hard, tedious, and often not as rewarding as one might think. Harsh deadlines, the constant pressure of your work being published before you, and constant failures and dead ends in research, it is incredibly grating psychologically. I am in my early 30s and the vast majority of similarly aged colleagues around me have either already left the field or have seriously considered doing so but decided to stay because they were indecisive or they just didn't know what else they could do. To be perfectly honest, I know very few people who actually genuinely enjoy doing science. Ironically, most of those who do visibly enjoy their work are in a position that doesn't require much science at all but is more like an administrative job. Another secret that is not really known outside scientific fields is that there is a frightening amount of research papers with outright fabricated content to some degree. As deadlines approach and you still miss data from 1 or 2 experiments out of dozens, a lot of people are tempted to simply fake the data and move on. Sometimes researchers outright lie about what they have discovered, but I think that is a rarer occasion. However, in general, the amount of fake posturing and overall fakery that goes into research papers can be insane. Sometimes you have to willingly ignore minor data that paint your whole hypothesis or proposal in a bad light. Sometimes you exaggerate your findings so they look more grand and attract more attention. I kid you not, a lot of the time it feels like working in an advertisement. You basically have to sell your paper, fake it if you have to, or you are going nowhere with your work. Story 38. The company or license you love is most likely staffed by many layers of corporate schmucks who do not care about what you want as a fan. They care about what doesn't diverge too much from the brand or characters and how to please their investors and board members. This became especially true as merchandise became more corporate once people realized how much money you can make. Creativity and giving the fans what they want doesn't matter to them. We want to make the things you ask for, but frankly, they often won't let us and all of us hate it. This is especially true with international companies. There's a reason a lot of popular releases recently don't have much of a presence on the American market. Story 39. I managed 3 tattoo shops over 15 years and most artists' quote-unquote custom work has been literally traced from Google image searches. Reverse image search your stencil always before it goes on your skin. Worse, that Sharpie they used to draw on you has been used on hundreds of people before you, some of whom had open injuries. Sterile markers exist, they know it's wrong and they don't care. And don't even get me started on basic contamination. Artists will routinely touch their phone, face, or unwrapped ink bottles, and then go right back to tattooing without changing gloves. Of course, there are amazing tattoo artists out there who are genuine artists and care about their clients, but you'd be surprised how booked up they are. I know a spontaneous tattoo sounds fun, but it really should be planned like a piece of fine art you want to hang in your dream home. Take the time and spend the money. Don't go to Target of tattoo shops run by schmucks. Story 40. Housekeeping staff typically work towards strict daily or shift targets, often around 3 rooms per hour, about 20 minutes per room. This forces them to work very quickly. They must clean the entire bathroom with water and chemicals, and then rinse again before drying everything with cloths. The same process applies to the wash basin and toilet. All used coffee mugs, cups, saucers, water glasses, and wine glasses must also be washed and dried by hand. Although we are provided with multiple color-coded cloths, not everyone uses them consistently. I've seen staff use the same cloth to dry a coffee mug that they just used on a wash basin, even in 5-star hotels. This type of crappy behavior is usually the result of being rushed to meet impossible targets. And if you like these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.